if we understand that 8% are moving, and then changing the conversation from the 3Fs, fees, funds, and fiduciary, and broadening that to participant outcomes and some of these other things, now I can get into a real conversation and a comfortable conversation with that plan sponsor, realizing if they're in the 92%, I can talk to them about these things, and then in time they'll approach me because I've added value to their practice as opposed to just trying to cold call and email them to death.
Hi, I'm Alex Cavallari, co-founder of 7 Group, and welcome to the Advisor Lab. On this show, we enable you as financial advisors to keep a pulse on what's going on across the advisor community and grow your practice in the digital age. Every week, we welcome leaders from in and outside the industry and dive into the biggest topics and trends we're seeing in the space from a business, practice management, sales, and marketing perspective. In this episode, we sit down with Andy Hudson of Step Strategic, a consulting firm focused on helping advisors navigate the 401k space. If you're an advisor and you support plan sponsors or are looking to build your 401k book of business, this is the episode for you. Andy gets into his philosophy on identifying red flag trigger events, how advisors can drip on 401k plans effectively, and how you can expand the conversation to show your unique value as a financial advisor. This is our conversation with Andy Hudson. A lot of advisors that we work with on the 7 Group side, also to a lot of advisors that listen to this podcast, they may have 401k business, whether it's a large chunk or a small chunk, but a lot of them are working with both individuals as well as some smaller or medium-sized organizations. So today we're going to talk through all about the 401k business, how it's evolving, how can advisors partner with plan sponsors, and just how they're thinking about that business holistically. But before we get into that, I think the context on who you are, your background, and then also to the firm would be helpful for the group.
Sure. The business name is 401k Grab and Go. And I started in 2012, I started a consulting firm called Step Strategic Marketing, where I went back to TPAs and I helped them grow their 401k TPA business. And through that process, Alex, we got to work with a lot of the top advisory teams across the country. So we would see what they were doing from a lead generation. We would see what they were doing from a growth map standpoint, and what they did from a service model. So since 2012, we worked indirectly with advisors. And then in 2017, I joined forces with Chris Barlow, whom a lot of your audience will be familiar with. He's the author of the 401k Sales Champion. And we started working one-on-one with advisors, and it also in a group format to implement those 3 areas of their practice. And a lot of advisors will say it in the sense of take my practice to the next level, take my 401k practice to the next level. What do I need to do that I'm not currently doing? I know what I know. I'm good at sales. I have a process. I have a good follow-up, all those types of things. What do I need to implement in the practice to take it to that next level? So that's 401kgrabandgo.com. So
cool. Yeah. And in terms of kind of the 401k business and just the advisors that you're working with every day, obviously it's evolved in a pretty big way over time. I think particularly not only for the solutions out there that 401ks are offering to their employees, but also that employers are offering to their employees, but also I think the financial wellness element has become kind of at the front of the conversation, particularly making sure that the employers are educating their employees on how to think about their finances, what they could be doing daily, what they can be doing over time to think about retirement, as well as some other big milestones. What are you seeing advisors that are working with these employers every day? What are they doing well that they're in the sense of that's making them successful to attract and engage these plans? And then on the other end of that, like what are some of the bigger mistakes that you're seeing regularly?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it started last year. There were a lot of participants, up market. The returns were strong. Everything was kind of business as usual. And then when 2020 hit, everybody all of a sudden didn't know, okay, it's not bad yet, but will it get bad? So a lot of participants and a lot of the advisors, to answer the first part of your question, a lot of advisors, and these were really large advisors, that was the interesting takeaway from this, that didn't necessarily need to be prospecting or they weren't assigned the task of reaching out with, RM, relationship manager, for their existing clients. But it was the principal of the advisory firm that was calling into existing clients and saying, hey, how are your participants doing? Do you need us to get in front of them? Can we help? How can we help in this environment? And then we've slowly started to see, you and I were talking before this about the fidelity study. We're starting to see those numbers kind of trickle into surveys and different things like that. That this is participants are hyper aware that this could have upset their financial planning and their source of income, and all these things come together. So advisors that got out in front of this and are getting out in front of this and helping participants look at this, we've been kind of shaken, if you will, financially. And a lot of participants are looking for, how do I need to look? I've gotten out of this. It's interrupted the daily rut, or the rut that they've been in financially, and it's making them think differently. So the questions they have for financial advisors, and how much am I putting away enough, and am I investing the right way? All those types of things are being evaluated in a totally new way, where I think before 2020, it was just, my 401k, my benefits, I go to work, it was much more, cadence and just kind of what we did every day. So advisors that are leaning into this opportunity and helping meet the needs of the plan sponsor, because the participants are coming in asking questions, the participants are showing and indicating that they're pretty uncomfortable with what's going on, how long will the market continue, all those types of things. Those are the ones that are doing well, and I think that the activity that they're putting in, the work they're putting in now, will pay off in the coming years. The advisors that have, and it's so easy to do, that are just focused on bringing in new business, and aren't really getting back out to existing clients and focusing on the participant education, I think that's a missed opportunity for them in their practice.
What are some of the ways that the advisors that you work with have gone into those employers and started to re-engage their participants? I think there's this idea of conceptually it makes a ton of sense, but a lot of the time, particularly over the last year, where participants may be hypersensitive to their 401k or hypersensitive to their benefits with everything going on. Tactically, what are some ways that advisors did go into these employers and really kind of roll out that educational lens, or some ways that they could be thinking through it going forward?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on the relationship, right? We were talking to an advisor just a couple of weeks ago that jumped on a flight and went out and saw a plan that was pretty small with very few participants, because the referral source was really strong to that particular advisor's business. And that didn't make sense on paper, but it made a ton of sense when you understood the relationships and the referral source and different things like that. So I think there's the anomaly. And then in general, there's so much more familiarity. We've all seen Zoom, use it every day. We've seen it work its way into, family, reunions and different things like that. So I think virtually is a great way. I've also seen a lot of advisors that will do a general topical, not specific to a plan that they serve, but working with, they'll throw out an invite and to all of the plans and talk about various investment, what they see going on in the marketplace, asset allocation, different things like that. So there's a lot more comfort to do things virtually, and I've seen plans actually servicing being combined across different plans, especially the small plan market, where it doesn't make sense to, maybe not make sense to get out in front of a couple people, but you can still touch them really efficiently virtually. So yeah, practical, nothing really new there, but I think that's a great way to, offer at least to do that, and then go from there. So,
and are you seeing that a lot of the plans, are, when the advisor pitches, say, coming in with more continuing education for participants, a lot of plans are have been open to that, or is it more so give us the information as the employer, we want to deliver it? How should the advisor think about, or how could advisors think about the idea of balancing like them going into the employer and then actually leading the conversation versus arming the employer with the content for them to be able to lead it?
I think you can split the market there and make an assumption based on the plan size. If it's a larger plan with trained HR staff that are handling the plan, they may want to deliver that in conjunction with all the other benefits that they're offering to the participants. They can do it efficiently. If it's a smaller plan where there isn't an HR, it's a business owner, or it's more of an operations person that's handling the benefit, the 401k plan, they probably want you to go directly to the participants because they have so many other hats that they're wearing. So I think it depends on the plan size and how best you can complement what they're trying to do, whether they're trying to get back to their day-to-day task or whether that's their job and what they do at the organization as an HR professional managing the benefits.
Yeah, and I think this kind of plays into this idea of a lot. Not only are participants looking at their plans closer, but also too employers are looking at their partners closer and their plans closer. And I think that we were talking before this about the data shows that 8% of plans will make a move in any given calendar year, 92% won't. But then we saw a study this morning that 1 in 3 plans are looking for potential new partners over the last year based on everything that's happened within the market. So that 92% or even like that 1 in 3 plans, and advisors going after 401k business, a lot of the time, and advisors, one, struggling to identify the plans, and then 2, struggling to engage those plans that are net new opportunities. What are some ways that the advisor who may be focused on this 401k business can not only reach out to and identify, but also to engage these plans in an ongoing way, which doesn't necessarily feel like overly salesy or too product heavy?
Yeah, if you look at the trends in the marketplace, most you see a lot of comb the 5500, look for red flags, let them know that there's a flag on the plan, offer to benchmark, offer to meet with the decision maker, and those types of things. And all that makes sense in our heads because if you're trying to win the business, that's exactly what you want to do. But when we flip it around and we look from the plan sponsor's standpoint, if only 8% statistically of plans move in any given year, then to the 92%, how likely are they, Alex, to want to have the plan benchmarked or to, have you meet with the decision maker?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're prospecting to a list of 100 plans that we've identified as an advisor that this is a plan that I can serve well and add value and they will help me grow my business and there's enough revenue, all those types of things, then I allow myself as an advisor to open up the conversation over months, even calendar years, to allow that plan to have a triggering event, what we call a triggering event, where they actually are looking at, okay, I need to make a move. We've seen some big announcements with M&A activity with record keepers. You've got service issues that were probably on the back burner. It's not bad enough yet to make a move, but it certainly is, it's on their mind and they know, hey, we probably need to address this, but it's probably going to be in this order. So I think understanding that if we understand that 8% are moving and then changing the conversation from the 3Fs, fees, funds, and fiduciary, and broadening that to participant outcomes and some of these other things, now I can get into a real conversation and a comfortable conversation with that plan sponsor, realizing if they're in the 92%, I can talk to them about these things. And then in time, they'll approach me because I've added value to their practice as opposed to just trying to cold call and email them to death, trying to get that meeting, trying to offer, a benchmarking service.
Yeah. And when you think about kind of the sales cycle of, that being 6 to 12 or 12 plus months, I remember when I was in the defined contribution space at BlackRock, the sales cycle was just so long. And it was so long compared to the individual investor sales cycle for the most part. I mean, sometimes, from a lead gen perspective, you get leads on the individual investor side calling you 18, 24 months later. I think from the standpoint of that 92% that that may either one, not be at that point of where they're moving, they're looking at other plans or other partners, or two, they're just, they're not at that point of, they want to make any changes. What are some tactical ways you mentioned adding value to those employers or to those sponsors? What are some ways that advisors can do that, right? Because I think obviously from a content perspective, there's a lot you could probably do there, which I'd love to get your thoughts on, but also too, just cadence of drip, cadence of information that they're sending out. What should that look like?
Yeah, I think it has to start with setting the expectation with the prospect that you realize that your conversation. So if you're a plan sponsor, Alex, in this conversation, Alex, I realize that you're probably not in the market to move your plan. So putting them at ease and realizing that you're just having a conversation. You do, as an advisor, you work with plan sponsors and you understand the world that they play in. So first of all, putting them at ease, you understand that they're not in motion. But you also understand their business and you understand what we call triggering events. And by understanding the triggering events, when a record keeper is sold, when the local third party administrator is acquired, when they're maybe the business grows and they acquire additional locations or other businesses, and now we've got a much larger group, we've got multiple locations, those types of things. Those are the things, the moving parts in the business that will cause a plan to move. So when you talk about cadence, when you talk about what's the outreach, it needs to be often enough, but it needs to be it's not pinging them daily, weekly. I think it's monthly, quarterly, and it's things around the triggering events that are equipping them, preparing them for when they come, experience triggering event in their plan. You've been talking to them about, what happens if you acquire another location and participant count goes up, or what happens if your record keeper is purchased, what happens if the service model, what happens if payroll, integration with the retirement plan, you're having, audit issues or whatever that is. So educating them on and helping them solve for some of those things and be aware of those things before they happen. And then that really opens up the communication. That does two things. That allows us to, so one of the biggest things is, and I'll bring this full circle, but one of the biggest things that I hear from advisors weekly is it's really hard to get in front of the decision maker and get their attention. And so we get some wins there. We get in front of the decision maker, but now what? Now, how do I stay in touch with them? How do I make this comfortable as opposed to berating them with my marketing or with newsletters and different things like that.
Yeah.
So understanding and putting them at ease, and then giving them content that's genuinely helpful, which by the way is the same helpful content that you put together for your existing clients. I think that that's the way that you nurture, going back to my comment earlier about 100 plans that you've identified over a 48-month period of time that you want to try to convert. Now I can talk to them naturally about things that are going to come across in the plan. It's no longer just a noise generation, activity of emails, phone calls, can we meet, can we benchmark, but it's much more around equipping them, dealing with some of the things that the Fidelity study came out with here last week, and some of those interesting things. So,
yeah. And how would you say advisors can monitor those triggering events? Within the day to day, it could be hard to make sure you're staying on top of those 100 accounts in terms of trigger events that might happen. Is there kind of a way that you coach advisors that it relates to because I love the triggering event idea, particularly setting that context before, as you're even initially having the conversation. So you're almost like preconditioning the plan to think through those things. And when they happen, you're going to be very top of mind. So I do love that in terms of your first or second step. How should advisors monitor those trigger events? How do you coach them in terms of monitoring those on a regular basis?
I think it's done with a check-in call, or some sort of check-in with those contacts that strikes the balance of not pestering, but just genuinely. So between the communicating about triggering events and adding value, just checking in with them, saying, hey, what's going on with the plan? We haven't talked. It could be quarterly. It doesn't have to be. It's definitely not monthly. Most plan sponsors have too much going on. But I think quarterly is probably a pretty good cadence of putting a call in and saying, hey, it's been a quarter since we've talked. How's everything going with the plan? You mentioned this. I saw that, XYZ was acquired. Is this impacting you? So I think it's going back to what you do naturally, what that advisor does naturally is networking. But between the networking and the outreach, you're talking about triggering events. You're adding value in that
Mm-hmm.
way. I don't think it's watching the market, what's going on in the marketplace, having access, listening to the questions that they're asking and providing value. I think it goes back to a lot of the basics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of technology has almost introduced an entire new thought where we put aside all of the normal courtesies that we would show each other interpersonally, right? And when I deal with you, I know that there's certain things that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't call you every day. I wouldn't send you 20 emails a day. I wouldn't do, and when we get to marketing and social media and some of those things, we throw all those things out the window. We just want to over communicate and we think we've got to drive visibility, and all those things are important. But I find that most of the plan sponsors and most of the advisors that do really well with plan sponsors, they keep the interpersonal in mind as they do the outreach, so that they're adding value, so that they're helping, and they have that genuine, they want to serve, they want to add value, they want to see participants reach. That's what got them into the business. One of the reasons that got them into the business is to help the participants, help the plan sponsors solve for some of these things. So once we get back onto that footing where we're back into dealing with them as an HR or as a business owner and trying to really add value, trying to listen to that conversation, that's a much more comfortable place for the advisor to be, as opposed to this realm of marketing that we don't quite understand. We don't know what the frequency is, and it just becomes this awkward, is this too much? Is this not enough?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Do you see that as well?
Yeah, I think to your point, I think in this context, for particularly the 401k business, it's less about your cadence from a content perspective as an advisor, and it's more about, I think, the depth of information that you're providing the sponsor. I would much rather have someone spend a quarter developing like a very cohesive, very in-depth content piece, whether it's a recorded webinar, which then translates into 3 or 4 different articles, or a larger research piece, which then can translate into conversational videos. I would rather the advisor spend that quarter developing that in-depth piece. So then when they follow up with that plan sponsor, it's not just, oh, hey, here's another, 400 to 500 blog post on why you should be thinking about XYZ. It's here's your, and really centering around those quarterly pieces, around those trigger events. You're able to, think about it in a way that is centered around like the points of which a plan sponsor is going to think about doing different business. And then 2, you're able to put the time into the actual piece that you're creating to cut through the noise of like the weekly emails or the weekly blog cadence. I think with the visibility factor, I think with like the end investor, because you're going after like a much broader audience, you need to stay visible and you need to be visible, and you're able to create light content that can touch someone passively. I think with something where in the B2B context, like your cadence doesn't necessarily have to, particularly with the sales cycle of that, which is 6, 12, 18, 24 months, you don't have to be as aggressive with your cadence, and you could be more thoughtful about the depth of content and the content that you're actually providing.
And I think a lot, as an advisor, you get pretty good at positioning and framing things to your prospect. And in this, we're talking about plan sponsors. So I think when we set the table and say, listen, over the next 8 to 12 months, I'm going to send you what the top 5 or 6 things that I'm seeing taking place in the marketplace that will impact your plan. And by plan, I mean you as the plan sponsor, your participants, regulatory things. You're not gonna, if you hear something from me, it's about one of these 5 critical things. It's not just going to be noise. So I can set the expectation, and then I can create curiosity, and so many of the advisors we work with are really good at this, because they take the trigger event and they make them their own, but it sets an expectation of what that cadence is going to be, it sets an expectation for the value that's going to be in that communication. And like you said, then taking that content and parsing it up and delivering it. Somebody might be a video, want to watch it on video. Somebody else might want to read it. Somebody else might want to print it out, put it, hand it out to participants, different things like that. So giving them different mediums to access the content. And the other thing, critical, light bulb moment, if you will, for advisors, when we talk about 401k prospects, that list of 100 that you're trying to lean into, it should be a very similar conversation that you're talking to your existing clients. So when I combine what I'm doing on my marketing and sales side with what I'm doing with my existing clients, now I'm hyper focused on my conversations, and I'm listening on when I'm delivering service to my clients, I'm listening to what questions they're asking me, what they're trying to solve for, and then in my marketing, I go back to that client to solve the problem for them, but then I've gone another layer deep in understanding what the need is, what the issue is, and now I'm using that same content on my marketing side of things. So when I send that out to a prospect, they're like, "Wow, Alex, that's really something that that we've been thinking through, and that's really insightful and helpful." So it brings the noise level down, and it really raises the value up. It makes cadence more a preference than the sole driver. I think we look at cadence, keeping in front of them, and all of those things are important, but cadence isn't as important as value. Cadence isn't as important as understanding what they're trying to solve for. As long as you're within, the realm of, don't do it once a year, right? And don't do it, too often. Somewhere in the middle there, where you're comfortable, will be a great thing. And what we've seen is when advisors start to combine the service side with the marketing and sales side, they get traction. I just spent an hour working with an existing client dealing with this particular issue. Now that hour is reinvested into my prospecting and sales. So I'm much more efficient in my practice, and I can talk at a whole. So when I go out and meet with a prospect, and I just had this conversation last week with a particular client, I can now take that conversation to a level that my competitor, they're not combining the sales and the service side of things, and therefore they're talking at a much higher level, not granular, where the plan sponsor is going to be.
Yeah, and I love the idea of using this kind of the client conversations and turning them into case studies of sorts within our industry, whether they're hypothetical case studies or not. The use of case studies doesn't get enough legs. And when you think about like any other industry, you think of B2B SaaS, you think of B2B enterprise, just from a service perspective, whether it's consulting or agency or whatever the case may be. You look at the use of case studies, and it's a massive use. In a B2B SaaS existence, like the idea of using a case study to show how powerful your tool could be, or the issues that you're solving for, is kind of like a standard. And I think it's also a super powerful way to root yourself in the person across the table, for the person across the table to root themselves in your solution. And I think that's the idea, is like, when you're thinking about your content strategy, if you're doing 401k business as a financial advisor, think about 1, trigger points, and 2, just depth of quality, right? Like depth of what you're going to provide these individuals. Because if they're getting a standard newsletter a week from a competitor, there's not a lot of depth going into that content. So like, how can you figure out these bigger pillar pieces to be able to use as prospecting assets to start the conversation or re-engage that prospect on like a quarterly or a semi-annually basis? So getting down to it, where can people check you out? And then what I would say is how we usually end episodes is, if an advisor was focused on kind of going after net new 401k business, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would have for them holistically?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect with you. If you're going after We find that there's four approaches, Alex, to how advisors approach 401k business. Approach one is an advisor that will only serve clients that approach he or she and say, hey, can you help me with a 401k plan? So reactive only, no proactive. The second approach is proactive, but only inside their network. So they'll look through their list of clients and contacts and say, who's a business owner, who's an HR person, who do I know that's influential at the company, those types of things. So proactive inside their network. Category three is proactive outside their network. Larkspur lists, Judy Diamond, wherever you're getting your list, cold calls, emails, those types of things. And then category four is what we call the 401k specialist. So how you're approaching 401k, how 401k fits into your practice is really key to what those three things that we would suggest. Category one, typically it's just reactionary, you're reacting. Maybe it's applying process to, if you have 20 plans that you've reacted to, you may not have process in place. So it's causing a lot of inefficiency and things like that. Category two may be, putting, understanding the process and reaching out with questions so you can develop those relationships and expanding the time frame that the cadence that you reach out to them. And then 3 and 4, it's going to be combining, what you're doing on the sales and marketing side of things with what you're doing on the service side of things, because it gives you a massive efficiency. So there's a lot more to that. The three pillars, and maybe this is what you meant by your question, but the three pillars that we find where an advisor needs to add process is one, around lead generation, two, which is their growth plan, so mapping out how you're going to grow, and three is how you're delivering service, what's unique from the fees, funds, and fiduciary. And if you do those three things, no matter which category or approach you're taking to 401k plans, you're really going to move the ball forward as far as building out your practice, adding team members if that's where you are, adding plan count if you're just in the building stages of it. But those three areas are what we see driving the biggest results and traction for advisors. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for joining us. We'll follow along on LinkedIn, and we look forward to touching base soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alex.